What I find is that the systems that we're using, that are our language systems, are outdated and they're in need of an upgrade. Because when you go on autopilot and you're using the language that was handed to you by people who came of age in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, you are dragging along with you outdated concepts, frameworks, and sometimes hidden meanings that are very disrespectful and insulting. And so we need to examine and upgrade and update the language that we use to make sure that it's in alignment with today's norms, expectations, etiquette.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Dandar.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited for this conversation because I don't think I've had any other guests talk about this topic. So which superpower would you like to bring to this particular episode?
I am bringing my superpower of inclusive language and specifically my X-ray vision into how language actually works. I help people see things they can't otherwise see.
Oh, nice. I love a good superpower, and that one sounds amazing. And Suzanne, could you tell us a bit about your background? Because you're not from around here. You're from a place very far away from me. So I would love to know.
I am. You can see over my shoulder, you can see I've got an Oakland, California poster. So that's a visual clue for those of you who can't hear me. So my name is Suzanne Wertheim. I am a former professor of linguistics and linguistic anthropology. I left the academic milieu. I left the university system in 2011, and I started consulting and bringing my academic expertise to the workplace. And because I got to choose where I live, I now live in Oakland, California, which I really love.
Oh, amazing. I tell you what struck me was your glasses. They are proper superhero glasses. Like if I were a superhero, I'd probably wear something similar. What's the story behind those?
The story behind them is my other more normal glasses broke. And so I'm wearing my more out there glasses. For those of you, again, who can't see, they are really very dramatic glasses and they're very pointy. And I don't know that I look like a superhero. I feel like I look like the nerd in the lab who has one wacky item of clothing on. And that's how you know that she'll type really fast and come up with the solution to things. So, but they're very dramatic, black colored speckled glasses that are very pointy.
Brilliant. So I often do a certain talk, which is all about how to click and connect with people. There's a slide in there where I talk about, as an introvert, like how do you strike conversation, especially in big public places or in conferences. And one of the steps I suggest is wearing something a bit wacky, and that way the conversation will come to you. I've just come back from a conference and I have this digital badge. It like scrolls across with my name on it, and it's such a great conversation starter. As I'm walking through the hall, people will just their eyes will just wander, and as soon as they do, you can tell like you've got them now. And so you just say, "Oh, I thought I'd put my name on here just in case I forget it." And it's always such a great like way to start the conversation. And that's without any effort. So I was just going to say about like sometimes wearing something a little bit different can also create that connection, can't it?
People crave connection and people have a hard time often knowing what to say to a person. I will tell you that we were chatting before and I'm like, I'm in alignment with you this way and in this way. I too have special things that I will wear, but they're a little more subtle. So if there's networking events, I have a necklace that I'll wear that's from a museum gift shop that looks like bubbles. It's glass. It is bubbles. It's glass bubbles. And I find that people feel compelled to talk to me about the necklace. So I call it my networking necklace because people are like, oh my God, your necklace, it's bubbles. Can I touch it? What is it? And so it's exactly the same thing. And also, an item that someone has chosen to put on themselves is generally safe as long as they have enough resources. If somebody's impoverished and they have holes in their shoes because they can't afford new shoes, you don't want to talk about that, right? But if there's somebody who has resources and is choosing to make a statement with something on their body, I think that's a safe point of entry for conversation. A lot of people feel very nervous about language and nervous about talking to people who look visually different from them. And so having that kind of point of entry I think can be very handy. So I recommend a wacky necklace or a badge or glasses or whatever. And it gives, oh, I'll tell you one more thing. I was on a podcast with somebody who is transgender, but transitioned rather late, and so is not passing the way people who have the luxury of puberty blockers and who transition earlier can pass for the gender that they weren't assigned at birth, but is the gender that's their identity. And this person told me that they will wear a dramatic hat to things because it gives people a way to refer to them as opposed to saying that trans woman over there. Right. So there are ways that people will also use this as armor. Oh, the person in that dramatic red hat is a thing that soothes her, that doesn't make her feel bad. So for those of you who are being singled out by your identity a lot, it's also a nice tool that can be armor for you.
Oh, what a great story. And I can absolutely see, how that can, like say, deflect some of that negativity, or you don't want to be under that spotlight. You want to create a new spotlight for yourself. And I think that's amazing. And what intrigued me was your background. You mentioned you used to be a professor in the academic world. What is that subject matter all about? I'm guessing it's to do with words and language, but could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So both linguistics and linguistic anthropology, I think one of the main things that we do is we search out and identify patterns and then the rules for the patterns. So it can be for linguistics, something like the patterns of the sounds of a language, that's called phonetics or phonology, or the pattern of the words in a language, and that's called syntax, right? But what I did, I wrote a dissertation that was supposed to be just about grammar. I was really interested in why, when you've got a dominant language and a minority language, why does the grammar of the minority language change, but the grammar of the dominant language doesn't change? And the answer was social context, was identity, was how people were presenting themselves to other people and the kinds of connections they wanted to make. So I wanted to write only about grammar patterns, and I ended up identifying social patterns. And so I got really good at connecting the words that come out of people's mouths or fingers. And I want to acknowledge that people also speak with their hands. I don't study sign languages, but not everybody speaks an oral language. I got really good at finding the patterns for a person is a certain kind of person in a certain context, having a certain kind of interaction. How does that affect the words that they use? And so it's pattern finding. And then what I learned is that I could articulate patterns in a way that was simple enough that people in the workplace could start to use them, because language is so complicated. Think about how long it takes to learn how to speak a language grammatically. And now think about how much longer it takes to learn how to speak a language appropriately. If children, you'll know that they can speak perfectly grammatically and extremely inappropriately, right? So it takes such a long time. There are so many subtle hidden patterns and rules for our language and how to be appropriate in a context. And so I've devoted my post-academic life to taking the academic concepts that my students would remember and write to me about 5 years later, 10 years later. I'm like, oh, people in the workplace can benefit from these. And so I take that academic pattern recognition knowledge and I bring it out to the world to help people for whom language can feel overwhelming and like a million dots. And I'm like, oh, let's take you one level behind those million dots and I'll show you the patterns that are connecting those dots.
Why is choosing the right language so important in today's modern world? Like, what's happened over the last few years?
So, both where you live and where I live, there have been tremendous pushes towards polarization, right? And politicization of things like just people's identities, the way that they were born. So, that's one kind of pressure. And so, what I like to do is help people recognize when there are distortions at play and when they're being tricked into having mental models and making judgments that aren't true because there are these distortions. So, that's one important thing because of this increased polarization that's been going on for a few decades through media and media propaganda, all owned by the same person in your neck of the woods and in my neck of the woods, same oligarch. But also, there's a new etiquette. Long story short, there's been a cultural shift in the time since I've been an adult. There is what I call a 21st century etiquette. And so I am Gen X. I came of age in the 80s. And the way that I was raised to think about the world is rather different than today's. And the one big difference is this. Back when I was growing up, it was acceptable to be disrespectful of groups of people, to marginalize or erase groups of people, to really not take certain groups of people into account. I think because they just weren't seen as important enough, or in some cases, not fully human. But there's been a shift that I've seen over the course of the decades. And the 21st century etiquette says we now have to take all people into account. We now have to be respectful of all people. We now need to make sure we're including all people and not accidentally erasing or marginalizing people. This is especially true for younger people who are entering the workforce now. Here we're calling them Gen Z. I'm not sure what the name is in the UK.
Yeah, same over here as well. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. What I find is that the systems that we're using, that are our language systems, are outdated and they're in need of an upgrade. Because when you go on autopilot and you're using the language that was handed to you by people who came of age in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, you are dragging along with you outdated concepts, frameworks, and sometimes hidden meanings that are very disrespectful and insulting. And so we need to examine and upgrade and update the language that we use to make sure that it's in alignment with today's norms, expectations, etiquette.
And I can absolutely relate to this because as my parents came from India way back in the sort of late 60s, 70s, some of the language that they faced is very different to what is allowed. And I was watching a documentary just the other day, and it was about the 1970s in the UK and just what times were like then. And I was looking at some of the signs and graffiti at the time, and it's horrific. But obviously at that time it was perfectly accepted in many ways. I mean, it probably wasn't perfectly accepted. It was less of an issue than it is now because you'll probably offend many more people now. So that was probably the difference. So I guess what I struggle with sometimes, and I'm sure this is a question you get a lot of, is we don't know what we don't know. So I'm probably going to offend somebody at some point. Like, any tips for someone like me to be a bit more aware and actually try and use some safer language?
Sure. That's an excellent question. And this is what I'm talking about with the language being so enormous. I'll tell you that I thought about this a lot when I was writing my book because I had different on ramps for different kinds of people were going to come. When you have a book that's going to be read by tens of thousands of people, maybe more if we're lucky, right? I have to think about all the different ways that people are showing up. And so I think that one thing you can do is make an understanding, give yourself some grace, and have an understanding that acquiring new language skills takes time, effort, practice, and you can only do it in small chunks at a time. So I tell people that learning inclusive language skills is a lot like learning foreign language skills. You wouldn't expect to learn all of the grammar and everything all at once. You're like, okay, usually somebody's teaching you. Now it can be an app that's teaching you, and they're choosing, here's this little chunk, learn about this little chunk and practice it until you get better. And then you can go on autopilot and produce it. I would recommend narrowing down to one area first and saying, okay, so one tip I give people is a great place to start right now is gender, because there's been so much change in how people are allowed to be publicly, the language around gender, the recognition. So there are many cultures and many languages around the world that for many, many millennia have understood that there are more genders than just male and female, and it's represented in culture and it's represented in language. For those of us who grew up speaking English, unfortunately, English has been lagging behind in that. And so one thing I would say is now that there is such a better widespread understanding of the fact that some people are male, some people are female, and some people are another gender, and they could describe it might be transgender, might be non-binary, however, there might be gender fluid. I think one thing to do is get your language in shape so that you're not accidentally excluding people. And it can be rather stealthy. So just yesterday I gave a talk and I had a slide where I said there's husband and wife, or ladies and gentlemen, or the opposite sex. All of these are sneaky, sneaky ways that the gender binary is coming through and suggesting the opposite sex. It's like two sides of the same coin, right? So you can say another gender, right? These little tweaks, or instead of husband and wife, you can say spouse and partner, right? Spouse or partner. Or for ladies and gentlemen, here's another UK-based story. I was talking to someone in the UK last year who is non-binary, And the conductor on the train, every single stop began his announcement by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen." So every single stop, this person on the train was made to feel not seen, erased, reminded of the fact that the conductor didn't think of them as a person there, as a customer there on the train. So I would say narrow down, do research, and find one thing to fix. I'll also say, and I'm not really here to plug my book, I did think about this for people, and my book is designed to take you through the top things that are most problematic. Every chapter ends with 5 quick wins and 3 things you can practice for a month. So when you are going on autopilot, so you can run an audit and fix your materials. And then when you're on autopilot, once you've practiced those things, by the end of a month, you should be able to produce spouse or partner more automatically as opposed to husband or wife. Or instead of looking at somebody's wedding ring and saying, "Oh, what does your husband do?" That person may have a wife, or that person may have a non-binary partner. So if you're saying to somebody in a job interview, "Oh, what," well, in job interview, you shouldn't be talking about somebody's partner, but at a conference, you're networking and you see somebody wearing a wedding ring, you don't accidentally offend the people who aren't married to somebody. You jump to the conclusion by having language that was designed to encompass anybody you meet, regardless of who they are.
Is it sometimes safer just to not mention anything to do with gender? Because like, if you're not sure, would you go as far as that, or would you say, look, that's a step too far, and we should talk about these things?
Good luck not talking about gender. Gender is embedded in the English language. So we got rid of German style gender when people went over to, when the Angles and Saxons and Utes boated on over to the UK, what's now the UK. As English developed, it lost a lot of its Germanic features and reflecting gender. So we really only reflect gender in pronouns now. This is why people are talking about pronouns all the time, whereas people who speak other languages like French or Russian or Spanish are having to wrestle with enormous quantities of the language. But we still are thinking about and assessing people's gender all the time. If you want to be polite to somebody, you're often going to use an honorific in front of their name, right? So if you know somebody's last name, you might make a judgment. Mr., you have somebody's last name, you're sending out an email and you haven't met them. And you read somebody's name and you make a judgment. Oh, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, Ms. Smith. It's very hard. Sir, ma'am, referring to a person in the crowd, or referring to a person, this woman here, she this man here, he is that. There's no avoiding gender. I mean, best of luck to you if you want to avoid it. I'm saying gender right up front because I think it's a thing we have to grapple with. And the more that you, again, do that systems upgrade so that your default language is including people. I mean, my most visited article on my website, I've got a blog that basically my newsletter articles, I've got a twice a month newsletter, and then we throw them on the blog. And the number one thing that brings people to my site is gender neutral alternative to sir or ma'am, because people are looking. And so thousands of people a month come to my website and I say to them, "Sorry, I'm waiting for the young people to come up with one. But right now you got to do workarounds," right? You have to say something like, "All right, the next customer, please," or "Excuse me, sir," or you have to find other ways to express respectfulness and politeness without making reference to gender. People are concerned. People are worried. They're like, "I don't want to offend my clients. I don't want to offend these customers. I have to train my retail staff to be polite on working on the floor. How do I make sure they're both respectful and not turning away my customers who are not the gender that we think they are when we look at them and jump to conclusions?"
That reminds me, actually, whenever we're working in any kind of public facing role, these are such important topics, because I work in training and I don't get to deliver that much training these days, but every now and again I deliver a training course. And I remember a couple of years ago I was delivering one, and I do a lot of doodling. So I'm a doodler and I draw a lot of stuff. And I remember the first day went great. And then the second day, one of the attendees, she put up a hand in the morning and she went, "Paddy, look, I love what you're doing. I love your visuals." But she said, "There's been something niggling at me and I just didn't have the courage to say it yesterday." And I was like, "Fine, yeah, go for it." And she said, "Why are your doodles not gender neutral?" And that just blew my mind, because I was like, I don't try and draw overly male or overly female drawing. They're literally just like upside down U's for the body and the little oval head. And I was just stunned because I didn't know how to react. I actually asked her. I said, do you have any advice for me? Because I don't know how to do a gender neutral one. And I don't think she did either, to be honest, but she clearly felt that they weren't. I'm still figuring that one out because I do ask other visual thinkers who do the stuff that I do, how do you get over that? Right. So, yeah.
It's a huge problem. And so one of the biggest problems is that we've been set up that male is the default, right? So male is the default, and then we add something to make something seem female. And again, there are not just two genders, but for the majority of people, people are, and even people who are non-binary are still being perceived according to the binary. So my research shows that it doesn't matter what your internal gender orientation is, what your internal identity is. People are going to judge you based on what they see and their expectation of you, right? So if you're perceived as female, they will treat you one way. And if you're perceived as male, they will treat you a different, better way. And so this is a problem both in our language. We'll say lion and lioness, right? We used to have author and authoress, but we still have waiter and waitress or actor and actress. So people in Hollywood are female people who act in Hollywood are trying to say actor for everybody. We don't say navigatrix anymore, right? I mean, we don't say authoress anymore. We don't say poetess anymore. Why are we still saying waitress and actress, right? So there's this idea that the male is the default and you add something, this little language part called a morpheme, a suffix to the end of words in English to say the male is the thing and then we're adding. But we see this with visuals all the time too. People will complain, why does this potato get eyelashes and a bow to show it's a female potato with the, like you'll have non-human or, in cartoons, right? You'll get like breasts and eyelashes and a bow to show that somebody is female when there isn't really that sexual dimorphism in the actual animal, right? But if they don't do something to show female, it's going to be completely interpreted as male. And this is what I was talking about, those distortions and those mental models. The problem is our mental models are designed to see males as the default because there's so much language and there's so much representation, and our brains work on pattern recognition. There's so much representation that says men are the important people that we start to get mental models where male are the default people. So it's going to take a lot of switching, but you are struggling with it. I promise you that professional artists are also struggling with how do we represent people, spoons, animals, foxes appropriately so that a spectrum of gender representation is visible to people. So there's no winning, honestly, because if you don't do the eyelashes, people assume everyone's male. If you do the eyelashes and the boobs, people are like, why does this cartoon character have eyelashes and boobs? I want to show my child. And there are plenty of women who don't look like this is ridiculous. So we're in definitely a moment of transition, and people are going to have to find their way through with innovations.
Can science help us here?
I think science can help. So my first principle of inclusive language, I have 6 principles, and my first and most important one is inclusive language is accurate language. And I think science can help. Here, language science. Language is our interface to the world. It's how we categorize, give value to, understand things that have happened around us. And so if we change our language so it's more accurate in the reflection of the world, it helps us have more accurate mental models. And when we have more accurate mental models, we can start to perceive the distortions. Who's being left out? Who did we forget to include in this thing? You can think of it as product design for language, right? Or customer experience or user interface. You have to think through in advance who are the different kinds of people that are going to show up, and how can I design something that can be used by everybody? And science, here linguistic science, gives you the ability to see the patterns to help you get the more accurate language that then will give both you better mental models and the people you're interacting with.
Could we explore some of those other principles as well? So you mentioned that the first one there, and there's 5 more. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. So my 6 principles are, let me go back one step and say, in general, what I find is when people talk about inclusive language, it's very often a list. Here are bad words to avoid, and here's the reasons why. And it's like identity group by identity group. And then here's the words to use in their place. And I feel that doesn't work well with people. 1, it's overwhelming. 2, language changes. 3, it doesn't give people the capacity to make judgments on their own. It's more an adherence. So I work with tech a lot, and a lot of engineers are like, just give me the list. I'm like, I can't give you the list because the list doesn't work. So instead, I came up with these 6 principles. I see inclusive language as a set of behavioral principles that are universal. Also, a lot of inclusive language is specific to a location. So, England or Canada or the US is where a lot of it is discussed. But I needed something that was global. I have global clients. I've researched multiple languages. I speak multiple languages. It wasn't acceptable for me to have everything just be English. So I came up with this universal set of behavioral principles that work with any language that I could get data from, any location I could get data from, and are shared core human values. And if you follow these principles, and then have discussions about language that's your language in your location, you can navigate confidently towards language that's aligned with your intentions. So that's the framework. So the 6 principles are, and you'll see that they're obviously universal and aspirational. 1, reflect reality. 2, show respect. 3, draw people in. 4, incorporate other perspectives. 5, prevent erasure. And 6, recognize pain points. And that's it. Everyone wants to be treated that way. Nobody wants people lightly referencing things that are upsetting to them, or completely forgetting that they exist, or speaking to them in a way that feels disrespectful, or not recognizing that their reality is a different kind of reality. Everybody wants that. So once you have that framework, then things start falling into place, and it's not a random mass of a million dots, but you can start categorizing things, and then you can focus on, okay, what are the main ways that people that I'm interacting with at work or not at work are being treated disrespectfully? How can I locate them in my language? And how can I then do that cleanup, that systems upgrade?
And does a particular language stand out for you where you feel that, you know what, they've got it right? Like that language there should be the one we all strive to be more like, or are they all the same?
I mean, some languages have it easier because they don't have right now. There's a lot of drama in English around pronouns because, again, we don't have grammatical gender anymore except in pronouns. It's the last place it really shows up. I mean, sometimes we throw an ETTE or an SESS on the end of things to make them feminine. But there are languages, like a language I did my dissertation on has just one third person pronoun, ul. Right. So it's just that person. Right. So you can, in fact, I knew a guy who was a real player, and he would switch from Russian into Tatar when he was talking about people he'd hung out with to disguise that they had been women, that he'd been hanging out with college girls, because he was able to. So there are ways in which some languages have it easier. But here's the thing. My research has shown that humans are going to human, and we are all born with brains and bodies that are set up for bias. This is why it's very hard to identify and eradicate bias, because every time a baby comes into the world, that baby has a brain that wants to take cognitive shortcuts, that wants to have certain kinds of mental models, and has a body that makes it pay attention to difference. I mean, there's so many ways. So humans are going to human, and humans are going to bias, and language is a reflection of culture and our brains. So yeah, no, there's not some ideal place. I think the more that we are able to accurately identify what are the ways that our brains and our bodies are set up to make us behave in ways that are not in alignment with our intentions, and hack changes one by one, I think that's the only way. And then socialize babies into that world, but we're not there yet. You can think about it as like food. Our bodies are set up to get us to eat in ways that are not good for us. And then food scientists take advantage. Phone use, like we've been set up with things that are addictive, right? And so it can take time to figure out, well, what makes this addictive, and how can I make it so that I only use my phone the amount that I want to? So too with language. What are the ways that we've just been programmed to think this is the natural, normal way, but it's actually hiding the fact that it's not good for us or it's not good for other people, to just forget about whole swaths of humanity or treat them as if they're not important.
I was thinking there around AI and the fact that I've seen examples in the past, and there's been some popular news stories, for example, when Google Images, they really messed up at one point when
Mm.
people were typing in well-known CEOs from the Fortune 500 companies, and then most of them were like middle-aged white men. Then they overcompensated by changing the algorithm, and I'm sure the current AI that we have has lots of flaws. What's your opinion on how the future of tech is going to really either help with this debate or actually is going to probably make things worse? I don't know.
I have two concerns about AI. I mean, I have more than two concerns about AI. One concern is that people who work on ethical AI are pushed out of large companies and I was just seeing, for example, on LinkedIn yesterday, I reposted a post by Timnit Gebru, who is a very, very prominent ethical AI researcher who was at Google, got pushed out of Google, went for a grant application and was rejected for the grant by saying she needed to incorporate big tech companies in her grant application in order for it to have merit, right? So one thing is that the people who are thinking deeply about the guardrails and how can we make AI not amplify and replicate the problems that humans have created in the world, those people are being marginalized. And in great part, it's because they're mostly women and they're often women of color. And the way that people's mental models are set up is that women of color are less important and they're treated with a lot of double standards. So that's one issue. Another issue is that large language models are eating themselves. So a decade ago, I was working on natural language processing and machine learning and AI for a particular government-funded project on Metaphor. And so I know how hard it is to create ontologies and categories that allow you to accurately reflect the world and then feed it into the system so that it generates a more accurate reflection of the world. So not only are people not doing that with ChatGPT, OpenAI, the other large language models, which I'm not going to call AI, they're large language models. They're on algorithms and percentages of the way things show up. They're not sentient, right? But one of the biggest problems is that the internet, what was I reading the other day? The internet is currently maybe 50% LLM generated content. So we're at the snake eating its own tail, right? And AI, in the things that I've seen, replicates and amplifies the bias that's in natural language. And so we can expect to see broader and broader strokes and stereotypes coming in. So I always recommend, so this is part of your podcast, what can you do? People will say large language models are the solution. And just yesterday I was giving a talk and someone said, how come you haven't designed a plugin for ChatGPT yet? And I'm like, A, too much work. B, I don't think it would work because of all the it's such an enormous heavy lift for it to actually be accurate. So I said, I'm just going to always recommend a human overlay, like use the LLM for what you're going to use it for, but then you have to come in with the principles of inclusive language and your inclusion checklist that says, who are the specific people that might be left out of this? So there's a space for people to be that final, I think of it as pilots with their clipboard, making a safety run around an airplane before it takes off. Before your comms take flight, you need a checklist of your own on your clipboard to make sure. And I don't see LLMs integrating that safety checklist anytime in the near future. It's not of interest to the people making it. And their data is getting increasingly poor quality, their training data.
Oh, wow. And I think the work that you're doing then becomes even more important, right? Because the more awareness we create about this subject, the better. Otherwise, it just kind of, we don't have that ethical voice then saying, look, this is problematic. So, yeah, amazing what you're doing. In terms of then your work, what are still some of the big challenges you see? And we were talking about tech, and you work a lot in tech as well. Are there some common themes you're seeing just in that industry at the moment, or is it pretty similar across different industries?
I mean, I'll tell you that I'm in the middle of a rebrand and a reframe because there are many people, especially I was talking about the polarization of our climate, right? So here in the US, a lot of people who haven't had lived experiences that show them what it's like to be erased or to not have their perspective incorporated, or who just they align with the dominant groups, and so the world is set up more for them. For them, bias doesn't seem real. It just seems like nonsense, and because they've never experienced it. So why is it real? This is why I'm always coming in with science. So I'm literally in the middle of a rebrand because a lot of people in tech are turning away from diversity, equity, inclusion work. And I'm like, but problematic language affects every part of your business and your bottom line. So I'm literally rephrasing things so people will hire me. Because it used to be that I could say, oh, inclusive language. I mean, honestly, a lot of what I do is the stuff I used to teach in my intro courses, right? Because it's just, let's use the science of how language works in the world. Then I was training people to be anthropologists or linguists, right? But now I'm like, let me train you to have a system that allows you to navigate and make confident decisions on your own. So I can empower everybody that safety checklist or that overlay. And so one of the biggest problems I see in tech is that there is a denigration of, I don't like the term soft skills. I don't have a great substitution for it, but there's this idea that technology is the savior, but technology is just a tool. And as I said, humans are going to human. And if you, for example, spend a lot of time and energy and effort recruiting people, and then your hiring manager hasn't been trained in strategic language and says three things in that high profile candidate that they wanted to do, you've wasted all your money because they're like, I can't thrive in this environment. I'm going to go. Right. I have story after story of story. Or for example, I have stories of sales reps saying just two words, and those two words tank in under 30 seconds, tank a 6-month long sales cycle by saying he and guys is one story, $4 million down the drain. And the company never figured out. I only know that story because a person who was in that meeting and saw it go down and was not being treated well by the company, a very high level, very high level technology specialist, because she was female, was really not included in that sales call by that bro dude salesperson, right? And so she saw it go down. And she said to me, the company doesn't even know why that thing failed. So I think they went back and said, well, we'll give you more for less money. Or, well, they didn't know that the person had so drastically offended the chief technology officer, again, with two words, that it had tanked a $4 million deal. And so there are all kinds of ways that people who focus on technology do not recognize how much risk and danger a poorly trained human component brings to their technology enterprise. And I just see that a little bit harder with tech than I do with other industries that I work with, like lawyers, medical people, journalists, comms people in any industry, et cetera. So tech is a fantastic tool, but there's always the dangerous element of humans. And if you don't train up your humans, you're going to really damage your bottom line.
Wow, that's amazing and incredible. Like you just mentioned there, that story with just those two words, that's completely destroyed that deal. I'm going to ask you a fun question now before we wrap up.
Okay.
So if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, and I'm guessing let's not make it about language because we probably answered that question. What's the thing that really niggles at you? What are those moments when you're like, I wish this didn't exist?
I mean, I'll just tell you the first thing that came up. And so this is for more return to office. I would have there be, everybody gets their own individual climate zone, because what we have is offices that are set for the temperature of male human beings wearing heavy clothing. And societal pressures push women to wear less clothing and reveal more of their body. And so what you have is offices with women with space heaters and or maybe non-binary people with who have a assigned female at birth biological body, right? So, but space heater, so many things. I would just have it be everybody able to control their own temperature, because before anything else, we need to feel physically comfortable. And so when I talk about male people being the default people, I would say that just literally comfort. I just know so many women who are so physically uncomfortable in the workplace because they are not literally freezing to death, but they are uncomfortable thermally because the temperature is much too cold to be comfortable for their body. I know that's not what expected to come out of my mouth, but that's just what popped in my head. So, and with return to office here in the US, I'm just finding women who were able to be very physically comfortable working from home are telling me how physically uncomfortable they are in the office because they forgot how freaking cold it is. So,
That's a point of contention between me and my wife all the time.
sure.
I'm forever saying to her thermostat must be like up the blink, because she gets hot very quickly sometimes, and then sometimes like the weather's fine and she's like, it's freezing cold. And so we're forever mocking each other on that one. So that one does resonate for sure. And yeah, in today's technological advanced world, we should be able to have like individual zones. So I'm not sure why we still don't. But no, that's a great one. Thank you so much for sharing that one, Suzanne. I love that. And if people want to know more about your subject matter and the topic we've talked about today, are there any like favorite resources that you would recommend, as well as your book and your website as well, if you could let people know how they can get in touch with you.
If you can spell my name, you can find me. There are just 2 people with my name in the world, as far as I can tell, and they do not have an internet presence. So if you can spell Suzanne Wertheim, you can find me at SuzanneWertheim.com. That's more for my speaking engagements and media appearances. Like this podcast will go on there and I'll backlink to you, etc. There's also my company website, worthwhileconsulting.com. And then people like to connect with me or follow me on LinkedIn. As I mentioned earlier, I believe, I don't know if it was on air though, I have a newsletter. I have an advice column. Readers email me with questions and I answer them in the advice column. And so people like that because it's little bite-sized twice a month ways that they can learn something new about language and start incorporating it. So, and then of course the book, The Inclusive Language Field Guide, available as an audiobook. If you think I got a nice voice, I read it for 8 hours. And it's an ebook and it's also a paperback, and it's available. If you are in the UK, many UK booksellers have it. You can order it from Waterstones or other places. It's around.
Oh, brilliant. And you definitely have a voice for podcasting for sure. So thank you so much, Suzanne. I feel like I've learned an amazing amount today, and I do feel that little bit wiser now, having had this conversation. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. And I know it's very early in the morning for you, so that's even more appreciated. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a genuine pleasure to talk with you. I think we're so aligned. People need superpowers, and I think it's important to point the way for them to acquire them. So thank you so much for having this podcast, and thank you so much for having this fantastic conversation with me. I really enjoyed being here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.